I moved to Taiwan in 2018 without a plan. Ended up with a place I love, a wife, a family, and really a second home.
So this book is a rejection of what it means to be successful, what it means to be at the top of your class, to have that job that everybody envies and have that path and buy that house and have that life that your parents really want you to have.
The final 3 years of being employed, I just found myself increasingly frustrated. I got to the point where it was like, am I really going to take a sixth job in 10 years? Or is there a different path? I wrote this book essentially as a giant permission slip to myself. Because the first few years were so challenging and hard. If you're going to take an unconventional path, you need at least one friend who doesn't laugh when you tell them your plans.
This is great. A lot of new
Great,
friends
yeah.
for you today. Cool.
Ni hao.
Would you like to say some hello first?
你好, 大家好. I can understand more Chinese than I can speak, but 你好，我是米保罗，我的书乌鲁记录，你们可以叫我小米宝. And then we'll do the rest in English. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate this. This is really exciting for me. I moved to Taiwan in 2018 without a plan. Ended up with a place I love, a wife, a family, and really a second home. So excited to be doing this in Taiwan.
He came here in 2018, and I met Paul in April of 2019. And I've always known Paul as one of the kindest persons I've ever met. When we first met, we met on Twitter. And he reached out and he said, I know you're doing this project. I know a little bit about it. I want to help you. Well, what can I do? What do you need? How can I help you?
I don't remember the specifics, but I mostly remember I had moved to Taipei with Angie. We moved in together about 4 months after meeting, and I didn't really have any friends except these two right here, Chen and But yeah, it was great to meet Emily, and then ended up joining a co-working space and starting to meet a few more people in Taiwan.
And I bring this up because the context of how I know Paul, I think it explains a lot about what he had been doing in those years, which we'll get into and which he talks about in the book. And throughout the last 7 years, he's really not just found a community, but he's built a community. And through that, has helped a lot of people, but also you can see from here how the process of receiving help from others, getting inspirations, and carving out a path that really works for him, that he now hopes that many of you could also have kind of that kind of inspiration. And I find that to be just such a selfless act and such a great generosity. So congratulations on the book. Paul Miller is author of 2 books that reimagines our relationship with work, the workplace, career, all these things that people tell us, adults tell us what it means to be an adult or adulting. From the US, Paul graduated top of his class at the University of Connecticut, which he claims he only went there so he could watch really good basketball games. And an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. Afterwards, he went to work at McKinsey. And I bring these things up because these are precisely the things he doesn't want you to think about. So this book is a rejection of what it means to be successful, what it means to be at the top of your class, to have that job that everybody envies and have that path and buy that house and whatnot and have that life that your parents really want you to have. Roughly 10 years ago, Paul quit his job and began wandering around the world and wondering, what else is there? There has to be something else there. And through that, he was quite ahead of the curve. He started what we call now digital nomading before it was the term. He built an online company. He had a really successful podcast. He built an online community. And along the way, he got really famous. Earlier this week, he was at another book talk like this in Hong Kong. Before I ask one of the first questions, I just really want to kind of set that stage in saying that Paul was quite really ahead of the curve. This is before COVID. He was talking about work-life balance, talking about working from home, talking about digital nomading, all these things that we take for granted now that seems so normal. He had been talking about this before then. And so when COVID started and people were starting to wondering, what is that new mode? And starting to think about, something outside of work, a path that's outside of it, he was already on it. And this is really where he comes from and what we're about to hear today. So here it is. Paul, you're in New York, in Boston, you're at McKinsey, you're at a really good job, and you keep thinking, I don't really love this. There's got to be something else I wanted to try. But in this book, it actually took, it was not an immediate switch. It took a little while for you to make this decision. Talk to us about that process and how did you finally say, okay, we're going to drop this. We're going to try something else.
So I think even early in university, there was sort of a desperation for like wanting to find my groove or path in life. And essentially what happened was for 10 plus years, I was confused, jumping from job to job, trying to find like the dream job. It just happens that being frustrated and increasingly discontent looked like success. So it was sort of a good place to hide, and people weren't asking me questions. And so I never asked myself too deeply either along that journey until the end of that.
And was it very scary? Imagine it must be very scary. I think for a lot of people, it sounds like a very scary decision.
Yeah, I think it wasn't as scary as much as I felt I almost had no choice. I think the final 3 years of being employed, I just found myself increasingly frustrated. I kept searching for more jobs, and I got to the point where it was like, am I really going to take a sixth job in 10 years? Or is there a different path? And I had met some freelancers who were taking different paths. And so I had some idea that, okay, maybe I could do what I'm doing as a self-employed freelancer. But that was really it at that point. And so I wasn't as scared as much as I felt like I was running out of options and I needed to run away from my current situation. When I quit, my only idea was to just become a freelance consultant. So I was going from full-time consultant to freelance consultant. So even then, my imagination was not very impressive. And it wasn't until after leaving, I think, that I started to make money, started to experience some of the time freedom and realize, oh, wow, this is the direction I really want to keep going.
If we weigh the benefits of a full-time job versus a freelance job, on the one hand, you have stability on the full-time job, a paycheck, stable paycheck. Over here, you have freedom to wake up whenever you want to, work today at a cafe and next day at a co-working space. On this hand, back at the company, you have a direct mentorship and partnerships. Over here, you have to look for your own community. Looking back, this seems. Tell us about some of the benefits you found here that you thought, you know what, actually, this is what was missing back at the old job that really made me want to make that change.
I think for me, the key thing to basically step back and think about is I don't think like what I call the default path of success is the wrong path. I think for me, it felt constraining and wasn't working. And so for me, it was really a process of tapping into this deeper curiosity and desire to reimagine a different way forward because I felt trapped. And so the way I think about this now, on the default path, you have visible benefits and hidden costs, right? Some of the costs for me were sort of this like inner turmoil. On the pathless path, you have visible costs. Everyone can explain the costs of taking a path like mine. People ask me about it all the time. What about money? What about your plan? Yeah, I don't have a plan. I don't know how I'll make money a couple of years from now. But the hidden benefits I started experiencing almost right away. It was really hard leaving my job, but suddenly I had time. I also had the weight of responsibility on me, which was scary. It was terrifying, but I knew those things were going to happen. But what I didn't expect was how exciting that felt. The opportunity to go out and try to make it on my own, to go experiment with setting up my days in different ways. And slowly over the first year, I started to experiment with living in different places, working in different places. And I had no idea what I was doing the first year. So scared. And I would be triggered every time an adult asked me what my plan was. But inside, there was just this like, oh my God, I'm finally heading in the right direction. I wrote this book essentially as a giant permission slip to myself because the first few years were so challenging and hard. And I think a lot of the confidence came from meeting others, meeting my now wife, having friends ahead of me who had taken bold leaps to do different things. And so I think what people often experience when reading my book is a permission slip to themselves as well. That's really all I'm trying to do is say, hey, here's my formula, here's my recipe. This is possible, because I didn't have that sense of possibility or a roadmap for what was in front of me early on the path.
One thing you touched on is just how difficult it is to make people, to find that community and make people believe in you. Two questions I have, how you mentioned a little bit about when adults asked you, how do you explain what you're doing? You're wasting your life away, right? What did you tell them what you were doing? How did you tell them? But also, how do you take that negativity, that criticism, and set it aside? And how did you eventually find the people who believed in you? How did you find that community believed in you?
I think early on, the short answer is you can't put aside what people think of you. It hurts, it's painful, and you need to sit with those emotions and process. Almost everyone who takes an unconventional path will invoke disappointment in someone near them, or projections of the people around them's insecurities. And I think a hard thing too is realizing some people may never come around to supporting you. It is so jolting to their worldview about what you're supposed to be doing. But eventually you have to just stop trying to convince them, right? You need to decide, I'm willing to continue on this journey, and I'm okay with what's happening around me. So there's hundreds of books in this bookstore about how to quit your job and make money. You can go to them for that. I made much less than my previous job after quitting. I think the most important thing, if you're going to take an unconventional path, you need at least one friend who doesn't laugh when you tell them your plans. And this was essentially my only metric in the first few years. I said, I need to be around these people because I am still building up my own inner confidence.
Find a friend who believes in you. Give us two more. What are some tips for folks who, need a little bit of that nudge to make that really courageous and scary change in their life? It doesn't have to be about work. It could be about a passion you're wanting to try, a friend you've been wanting to talk to for a long time and you haven't, something that is equally scary and yet life-changing.
I think one other key thing is to not see a major change in your life like this all or nothing leap. I think in many cultures, people tend to think they can only do something if they can do it perfectly, or everything is figured out first. Right? And so detaching yourself from that story and actually getting to know people who have actually made transitions. Everyone tells this clean story of, oh, I had this moment of courage and I leapt. But the reality is it usually starts years earlier. For me, I did experiments, all these things years before I decided to quit.
So the second one, so your first one was find a friend who believes in you. Your second tip is to keep at it one at a time. It's not perfect, and don't go for perfection. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, I think another one is just, I write about this in the book, but reframing like fear of what might go wrong and looking at the costs of your current state. This really helped me, flipping from seeing, okay, I might lose money, my savings account might shrink, things might go wrong, but those are reversible. And if I stay in my current situation, I'm becoming more cynical, grumpy, I'm not a very happy person. And like every day I continued in that state, I started to see that as a lot more risky for the life I was living.
To quote yourself from your book, ultimately, figuring out what to do with freedom once we have it is one of the biggest challenges.
I had this moment a year in, I was living in Boston after I quit my job. I was going to a co-working place every day, Monday through Friday. And one day I didn't really have stuff to do. I mean, I was trying to get client projects. Yeah, I mean, emailing people doesn't take that much. And I'm just like, wait, why am I still going to work 5 days a week? So I had this idea that I should fire the manager in my head. And so I always try to remind myself of this when I'm creating rules for myself or being too sort of blindly going forward, repeating things that don't make sense with what I actually want to be doing.
I do want to point out one thing. We keep talking about not working and leaving your work, but I do want to say this is a really studious man. Even though he's not at work, over the years, when I've known him, when it's about whether trends in the industry or technologies he's embracing, he's doing his homework. He's working all the time. It's just not what we think of as clocking in and clocking out. So I think it's also one of the things you don't talk about is really how hard you continue to work, even though you're not at an office setting. Just want to acknowledge that.
One thing for me was in the final years of my job, I was spending almost all my working hours doing stuff I would rather not do. And I was only doing it for the paycheck. Whereas now, I'd say 95% of the time I spend working and even just things I do naturally, like read. I'm a curious person. I love creating. It doesn't feel like I'd want to skip those to get to the end result. This is also just part of knowing yourself, right? I was extremely anxious about money growing up, extremely curious, creative, always doing stuff with my free time. And so those concerns for me were not the biggest concerns after leaping, because it was like, okay, I'm really anxious about money. I'm probably not going to spend any, or I'm going to try to make money. And what will I do with my time? It didn't really scare me because it was like, well, if you remove work, I'm just going to be doing stuff all the time, reading, surfing the web, doing stuff online, taking walks, hanging out with friends. Whereas those things might be different for you. Yeah, one example, Emily mentioned my podcast at the beginning, very successful, but to many people, it would be a failure. I've never made money on it. I do it for fun. It's very energizing. Takes a lot of time sometimes. I've done over 200 episodes over 7 years, and I wouldn't have the energy or time, or it wouldn't have fit in my mind to do something like this with so much of my time before leaving my job. But now it's like, yes, I want to be spending my time doing these things because it gives me energy.
Right. Let's hit some QAs. You had a gentleman in the front, and then there were some back here too. Okay.
Now that you've achieved success or external success in this niche field of like publishing and stuff like that, what are some of the doubts you might have or downsides that you see now that you've actually achieved it? You know, before you had external success from the McKinsey, MIT, MBA Sloan path, and you kind of like, oh, not so great. And what would you say the downsides are for you, or doubts you might have that you didn't realize until you achieved what you have currently?
Previous path, I had the extrinsic success, it did feel good for the ego, especially. Internally, never felt great. This current path, I finally was successful. That's your story. I felt really successful before making any money from writing because I just felt good about my life. It was hard to convince other people of that. So I didn't have like the validation. And we do want to be respected and approved of by other people. We all crave that to a certain degree. It's more just been like, I just feel so lucky, like so much gratitude. I spent so much time writing for so many years. Even when I published the book, I didn't expect to make money. The fact that I'm doing an event like this is just like, man, I just pause and reflect. And this is just beautiful. The second thing on that is my income has been falling for the last 2.5 years after a big spike from selling a bunch of books. I don't have a plan for a couple of years from now. So like the external stuff is huge question mark, but this is why I optimize so early around like, okay, I want to design everything around actually liking what I do so I feel like I can do it for decades rather than aiming at the external success. If my book sales drop to zero and I don't make a lot of money from writing over the next years, doesn't matter. Like I'm just gonna keep writing. I love it. It's so much fun.
Do you feel that you were a different person back then when you were still working for those companies versus when you stepped out to be by yourself? Because I did hear something just now around how you talked about the hidden costs and emotions. If you could elaborate on that, that would be helpful. And then the second part of my question is, how do you overcome the peer pressure?
So on the default path, I had the external success. So nobody asked questions. And I could get away without asking myself questions too. But underneath that was all this emotional immaturity, all these emotions I didn't want to feel. When I quit my job, I had to feel those emotions. And two options. One was go back into the shield, the comfort of a nice path, people approving of me, or go forward. I didn't want to go back, so I had to learn how to deal with the emotions. It's been a journey, but a lot of it is just sitting with it, feeling deeply the shame of feeling like a bad person, the insecurity of not knowing what the next step is. And it's really about not making decisions from those emotions, hoping they go away, but saying, okay, the insecurity is coming with me. Might as well go after what I care about. The peer pressure, I think, is easier for me. I spent 10 years on my previous path, and there weren't like people I wanted to switch places with. Extrinsic metrics, I'm probably the least successful. Like if you're looking at money, probably the least successful person in my graduating business school class. And so if I had a lot of insecurity about what they were doing, I wouldn't have taken this path. So I think I'm more wired for it. But I do look at I see my friends doing crazy stuff, super successful. It might be nice to have a little more money, but I don't know. You can only live like your life at a certain point.
I left my work the end of last year, coming back to visit my parents. But a few months into my sabbatical, I decided, I just couldn't really go back to my old work. And
many such cases.
yeah, and that created a lot of fears. But and in your book, you mentioned, I think, don't use money as a filter to decide finding the thing that's worth doing. So now I really find joy doing handstand and try to ride a unicycle. But I just can't see how this is going to link to potentially bring an income in the future. How do you think about
making money, is that really need to link to our passion, or it's worth to explore, like to spend a little bit part of my time to keep me survive, but still, doing the thing I'm passionate.
I think when people start with the story of, oh, I need to monetize my passion or make money from the things I'm doing, it can mislead people, right? I think that was never my goal. I assumed I would never make money from writing. It was kind of a shock to make money from writing. What I decided was I want to write. I want to spend a lot of time doing that. I need to figure out how to make money doing other things. And so in my second book, which hasn't really done as well, it's sort of broke even, but it's a great 9 months of my life working on that book. I have this idea of like good work is like my writing for me, conversations like this too. And then I call it like the good enough work, which is like, if I had $1 million, I might skip this, but it's buying me freedom. And at the margin, it's a more efficient way of like keeping my life going on this path as opposed to having to like go back. So that just kept evolving. Every 6 months, I would just like keep updating the plan. I would just do whatever to keep it going.
I did have a question, but I will throw it out. Actually, really, I want to amplify some of the words that you said that really resonated with me. One was when you said, I wrote this as a permission slip to myself. That really stuck. I think for most people, it actually is that. When you said, find a friend that believes in you without laughing, like that is more important than any book. And I would go further. I would say if they are laughing at you, they're not your friend. Like that's almost your definition of it. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Is just a moment ago with Emily, when you said, "Oh, by the way, even though Paul's doesn't do his have a normal path or something, he's working really hard." And I want to say, even if he does not do that, he is totally cool dude. And like, it's actually, those are separate because that relates back to the money thing and like, oh, I can leave my job or whatever, but I have to make money. Otherwise, like people, and I think that is something that I've gone through before, to emphasize that to myself, that I don't have to do stuff, even though I don't have a job, in order to justify not having a job or something. I want to kind of add more on that because I think that cannot be said enough.
Thank you. Thank you for amplifying those. Appreciate that. I think this is actually an interesting topic because after I quit my job, I wanted to escape work. I wanted to do as little as possible to fund my life. And what I found was not that I actually wanted that, was that the space I created I literally started practicing it. The space for non-work is where I found myself. And so this extra time and space, it became, everything flipped to, I need to fund this not working, not thinking about work time. And so I radically lowered my cost of living. I pretty much would like try to do anything in as little amount of time to fund it and keep it going, because it was in that space that I sort of like came back to myself. And that was a multi-year journey. And early on, my path didn't look successful, but I started to feel successful, or whatever that means, because I was literally just coming back to myself. But it was, and I've talked with Cameron. He's got a great journey and story as well. It was purposely trying not to work hard. So I jokingly tell people, have you tried working less on the problem?
After you started this path, does your circle of friends change because you have different lifestyle? And how did you adjust your mind?
Yeah, two things. One, I literally couldn't, or at least in my head, I couldn't afford to hang out with some of my friends because I was living in New York and Boston at the time, and they'd want to do expensive dinners like we always did. And I was feeling really scared to spend money. Two, I gravitated toward those friends that had taken bold paths. My friend Irv here had quit his job a couple of years before me. And so he was one of the people I visited, reason I came to Taiwan. And so I started gravitating toward those people. But yeah, I think some friends have fallen away. Some are triggered by what I'm doing. It makes them uncomfortable. But over the long run, I think the good people stick around. I think also I got sort of lucky. I met my now wife, Angie, about a year and a half after quitting my job. And so she was on her own journey of blowing up her life and taking a different path. So, I mean, where I was every day at home, I had this other person I could talk to all the time. I mean, that's just been invaluable. So if you're single, try to find somebody else on a that wants to move in a more interesting direction. Maybe we can make some matches here. Every pathless dating. Everyone asks, how do you convince your spouse or partner these things? I have no idea. I've never had to go to Angie and be like, hey, I want to do this. She's always just like, yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't you follow your creativity, your curiosity? And so when I met her, I had zero income for several months and no plan. And so very good test to see if somebody's really into you.
Hi, my name is Christine. So I want to ask a simple follow-up question. Along the path, what do you think what matters to you most now and why?
Say a bit more. What do you mean by that?
I heard a lot from you saying that what you realize what you don't want to do and you don't like to do. But I'm also wondering, along the path, have you ever thought of what really matters most in your life? And can you share with us?
Yeah, I probably think about that a lot. I'm pretty principled and very strict with like following that too. I think always for me has been relationships and creative work ahead of paid work. And so that is so important to me. And I try to put it ahead of doing things like just because like status or money or these things. And it's incredibly hard to keep practicing that and make mistakes. The last 2.5 years, I'm now a father. I have a 2.5-year-old, and I made a bunch of money from book sales a couple of years ago. It's lower now, but I decided, okay, there is this money. I'm just going to spend as much time with my daughter as possible. Hard though, because it's like continuous trade-offs of like, oh, the work I want to be doing, all these things. But yeah, I try to just continue to practice the things I claim to care about.
Just in preparation for your future conversation with Tyler Cowan, what are you working on next?
Yeah, I think, as I said, parenting really was my priority for the last couple of years, and I'm really trying to like find my groove back. Part of why we moved to Asia is to get a little more support from family for helping with our kids. So I have been working a little more, doing some writing about money. I am working on a book called Buy Your Freedom about like how to deal with all the emotional money issues. If you want to take these weird paths, still hard and confusing. Another thing is I am launching this like special edition hardcover version of the Pathless Path. Like people just like this book, and it's sort of like beyond my explanation. So printing something of my own, funding it, doing that as a bet, leaning more into the writing, and yeah, just like continue with doing the things I enjoy. So 2 things before we leave. One, there's going to be I'm going to stick around and sign some books here. Gonna head over by the lake over here. There's like benches and tables. I'll be hanging out there for the next couple of hours. Come hang out. I love meeting people that have read the book and stuff. Second, I just want to thank all of you. And then most of all, just thank my wife, Angie. She's actually a writer as well. She's putting out a book. It's going to be called Made in Taiwan. It's going to be about imposter syndrome, overcoming fear, the journey of motherhood. I think it's going to really hit with a Taiwanese audience. So look for that. I think it's going to be awesome, and really just been amazing to have you on the journey with me, Angie.
Thank you so much, Paul, today for a lot of the, I think a lot of things you talked about really hit to the core when I read it. And I think for the audience as well, some of the things to walk away with. Find a friend who believes in you. Find an Angie who loves you and supports you unconditionally. It's a work in progress. It may be scary, but take it one step at a time. Redefine your failure and risk. Finding your internal success. Carrying your insecurities with you, but not be negatively impacted by it. And earlier when I talked about being studious, thank you for that. Let me correct my term. Methodical about it. I think to me,
Methodical.
oh, well,
More
looking back,
chaotic.
yeah. But making back, there's a method in your chaos that I think maybe you didn't see it then, but reading this, you could see that there is a mythology in how do you proceed to be okay with yourself.
Yeah, I like that. It's like my own groove, my own flow. And thank you, Emily. Thank you, the publishing team. Emily has a company, Ghost Island Media. They have a bunch of great podcasts, a couple in English too, a few in English, I think. I met her as she was starting this, and it was awesome to see her journey. She's got a bunch now, and I still listen to the Taiwan Take, really good podcast.
She's one of our first supporters. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that.